obviously, we got to touch on Japan, and it's probably the nation we're going to speak the least about. They had the two teams. The main one was Absolute, obviously, and they had a couple of good players. And Extremesland, they actually looked pretty good, even playing some pretty structured CS, and they played, were sort of impressing me to a decent degree. But they've now decided not to participate in CS anymore. Honestly, I can't really blame them. I think it happened after a lot of these announcements did come out concerning the Asian region. And that's exactly what I thought when some of those announcements came out regarding Pro League and stuff like that. I was just thinking, how many players is this affecting who they're already the thoughts in the back of their mind, there's not much for me to play for here. I'm logging on every day, 5-6 hours a day, putting the time in to get good at this video game, hoping that my chance and my opportunity comes along. And then the main source of those opportunities gets taken away. It literally just kills your career.
We're talking about Asian Counter-Strike, and episode 1 is going to feature my good friends Pili and Bleh. So to introduce them, obviously Pili is my co-commentator and is regularly seen on a lot of Australian broadcasts, but we also do like to cover a bit of Asian Counter-Strike. So it's good to have you on here, Pili. And Bleh, some of our viewers might know you as the dad bod of the subcontinent. It's also good to have you as the quote-unquote premier Asian Counter-Strike analyst. How are you both feeling tonight? Let's start with you, Bleh.
I'm feeling great. Feeling a little, obviously, quarantine, a little dry, a little alone, a little lonely. But I have you guys as company, so that's nice.
What about you, Pili?
I'm feeling okay. I wouldn't say we're close friends, really, Jordan, in all honesty. But, I'm feeling okay considering the circumstances. Keen to talk about some Asian CS. It's been a while.
It's been a while. And there are multiple reasons for that, which we're going to talk about quite a bit. Obviously, the minor qualifier changes as well, something that we sort of wanted to break down and discuss what we think is going to happen there, and maybe what we think could have happened had the minor gone ahead. But the whole point of this is to talk about Asian Counter-Strike. So let's dive into things. And I want to sort of start this off with a little bit of a perhaps controversial topic. I've already sort of broached this with Pili, and I know his thoughts on it. But for you, Bleh, and I kind of want to say this in that I started casting Asian Counter-Strike in about 2016, right? And I think right now in 2020, this is the worst state that Asian Counter-Strike has been since I started casting.
I thought it was 2019, and then 2020 happened, and I do agree with you. It has gone from bad to shit to like, holy fuck, what are these people doing, right? Like, there was a point in time where you had like Tyloo able to compete with some of the best teams out there, and then of course you had certain teams like Vici. You had some of the SEA teams, for example, that make it to the minors, that maybe pull off some pretty impressive wins here and there. We saw the Vici run last year in Katowice, for example. They looked pretty decent considering Tyloo were looking good as well. And 100%. I think Asian CS is right now in the worst state it's ever been in across all iterations of Counter-Strike.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Obviously, Pili, we talked about this, and you seem to be fairly on board with that as well.
I think it's just a question of opportunities, really. I mean, obviously, Katowice was a high point. That was, two Chinese teams just going ham in one of the, major minor systems due to a couple of good upsets over some European or some North American teams here and there. That was a pretty big high point. And now we're sort of in this situation where, due to the global climate, due to, certain tournament circuits choosing to, bring things back a little bit, there's not as much to play for these Asian teams. And it doesn't seem like, in terms of actual organizers within that space, are stepping up to be able to introduce some more opportunities and give these teams something to play for. So where really is the motivation going to come from?
Yeah, I kind of want to bring in the discussion about coronavirus pretty early. Like, I feel like you can't avoid talking about it at the moment. No. And it's something that, I don't know, like I was sort of doing a little bit of research and thinking about this topic, and I was wondering, like, why does Asian Counter-Strike feel so shit this year? And I went back and I looked on HLTV and Liquidpedia, and I tried to figure out what tournaments we'd had up to this point that featured Asian teams in 2019, up to April in 2019. And I'm just going to go down the list, right? We had the ESL Pro League, the regional stuff, Asia Minor in Katowice, Cobex Masters, WESG, which WESG, to be fair, is like an international event, but it did have 3 Chinese teams and an Australian team, so I kind of kept that one in.
Fair enough.
ANZ Champs, obviously, and we had that Star Series event in Shanghai as well, which I think you might have been at, Bleh. And that also had 3 Chinese teams as well. and it's a big event in China.
Yeah.
So there's that for me was like a pretty good list. You get to April, you've had that many events in 2019. Then I was like, well, how many have we had this year? We've had the minor qualifiers, which now don't even matter, and we've had ANZ champs. That's it. Pro League's been basically binned because the teams got invited automatically into the new season of Pro League. Haven't heard anything about WesG because all of that got cancelled. Cobex Masters not coming back as far as I know. And everything's kind of on hold. So is it really is it really as bad as it seems, or is it just that there aren't any events right now?
I think it's a global thing, right? I mean, yeah, go ahead, Philip.
I think here's an interesting thought experiment, right? So pretty early on, actually, Vici were the team that qualified through to go to a few things, and Tyloo had to take their spot. Now, Tyloo's a team that is kind of in a pretty bad position at this point. They've had to bring on Zedar. They've lost Bentet, one of their star players. Let's say that if Vici is actually able to be the Asian representative, would they actually do that much better? Would they, give Asia a bit more of a hope in some of those tournaments? And would we feel a little bit better about it? Or is it just as simple as there's not as many opportunities available for some of these teams? And on top of that, the representatives from Asia aren't doing very well in competition. So, that I think it's a combination of those two. But maybe if Vici was there, we would feel a little bit better about that. I think they're quite a decent team at the moment. They just really lack the experience.
What's your take, Bleh?
I feel it's I want to agree with you, but at the same time, I got to bear in mind, like this Vici team, we have seen them play time and time again in the past. They lost Freeman, but they did manage to pick up what's his name?
Jam Young. He's a gamer.
Jam Young. Look, he's a gamer. He's really, really sharp for considering how inexperienced he is. But it's always going to be a problem that the firepower in the team is so inconsistent. You have Kaze, beast, the best operator in Asia, definitely a player like, I would rank him almost at the level of Bentet, right? Obviously, Bentet being a more well-rounded player, but Kaze is legit. That guy is legit. But apart from him, you have Jam Young looking good right now. You have Advent as in-game leader, no doubt the best in-game leader right now in Asia. But let's be honest, he's more of the Hunden variety, right? He really can't frag. And if you're going to be a not fragging in-game leader, you need to have consistent top fraggers, not just Kaze, dropping a 30 bomb every game. Jam Young doing a decent job, and Zoking. I mean, I get it. His role as an entry is, you live and die by the entry, right? You either might drop like a 25, 30 kill game, or you're just going to have like a single digit game, which happens too many times for him to really be considered as kind of like a pillar of the team. And then you have the fourth player. I do believe it's Almond is still playing right now.
Yes.
And yeah, and again, Almond, I haven't really seen him have consistently good, solid games, right? And I don't buy this entire thing about being a support player and whatnot. I don't think that really flies. So until they really upgrade their firepower, I still would go with Tyloo, because despite the fact that as a unit, Vici look better, they look like they play better Counter-Strike, they seem to have a better fundamental understanding of how to approach the game. But Tyloo, I know they're trying to be very highly tactical at the moment. He started in Pro League, a lot of cool setups, a lot of cool executes, but they weren't really able to have a plan B or a plan C when that didn't work out. But man for man, just pure firepower wise, I would still say a Tyloo can potentially pull off an upset on a good day against maybe the likes of a FaZe or a Fnatic or any of the top teams, just based on pure firepower. But for VG, I kind of feel like they have the right understanding, but they can get bullied by some of the top 10 teams.
I mean, you guys are sort of touching mostly on the top end of the scene. My take as well is like there's been this massive shuffle, not only towards the top end of things when you look at the likes of Tyloo, but obviously MVP, all of their players have gone pretty much everywhere. The Southeast Asia scene is all over the place right now as well. And so it's very hard to kind of get a gauge on where everything is sitting with all of these new rosters when there isn't that much competition to take a look at the moment. So I don't know that it's not necessarily even just at the top, right, with Vici and Tyloo not being as strong as they were in the past. But like the scene as a whole, particularly the loss of MVP, I feel like, it takes out, instead of there being a top 3, now there's really only a top 2.
Yeah, and I guess the death of MVP really made things like icky, right? Earlier it would be like, all right, we got Tyloo, we got Vici, we got MVP. Like these top 3 teams are the teams you can really look up to if you're like an up-and-coming team in SCA, East Asia, whatever. But yeah, from what I heard, it's kind of like conflict in the team where they wanted to like get some of the old school guys back, the Solo and his gang, and it was kind of like very messy from what I read.
Yeah.
And this entire exodus of like all the top players from South Korea going over to teams like, from Tyloo towards Lucid Dream, it makes no sense to me. I mean, they're joining teams who historically had communication issues. If they joined, let's say, an SCA team who communicate in English, let's say like teams like BTRG, or maybe some of the Southeast Asian teams like the Singaporean teams, for example, like X-Boot, Dreamscape, or PaperX, or some of these other guys, it would make sense. But then you join Tyloo, who have historically struggled with Bentet and Xcurious language barrier. And then you join Lucid Dream, a Thai team who are notorious for the fact that they only communicate primarily in Thai. You've never seen, like, Thai teams are so like, isolated in their region. You'll never see a mixed team. They don't even pug together. They don't even play pugs, man.
Dude,
they're like, no, I want to play with Thai teams.
That
What
move
the hell?
absolutely triggered me. And it's literally because there's just I can name like 15 pretty sick Thai players. I've been biggest Thai fanboy in ages, and you're just going to get two of these Korean guys. But at the end of the day, I mean, look at their results. They seem
They're
to
still
be doing
winning.
pretty well for
They're still
themselves.
winning.
Crazy, Pili.
You can't argue
like
with it.
you love Thai CS so much that you even decided to date a Thai woman. I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That
I mean,
great, dude. That one's great.
look, I just do what I can. I'm just trying to support the scene. I'm a good guy at the end of the day. No, honestly, like the MVP discussion as well is just an absolute, clusterfuck, in my opinion, because the thing is that I'm not even thinking about these two guys on Lucid Dream, right? You're looking at Lakia and Jinx. Jinx I've heard of. Lakia I didn't hear of as much before he started playing in Lucid Dream, right? In terms of MVP, I was thinking we've got a team with Zeta, Zyne, and Stax, who showed himself to be a pretty good player. You've already got, the three fundamental sort of things that you need, and you've got a good experience base behind that. That's a sick team. Why would you even mess with that? And then at the end of the day, the only downside to that, I would think, is, okay, so if we have a problem in the team, if we have some internal issues, which is what ended up happening, we don't have anybody to replace those guys. That's what I thought. Like, you do not have the players to replace people if there's internal conflicts in the team. I thought that was the main issue. But then you've just literally seen these two guys from Lucid Dream who don't even come from a PK roster. They might have come from like a different iteration of MVP or some of the other second-rate Korean teams, and show that they can top the region. It's like that argument isn't even valid anymore.
All right, well, since we're on the topic of MVP, is there anything more that you wanted to throw in there about them, Bleh? Because I think a lot of this discussion is going to be fairly similar from my perspective and Pili's perspective, because the majority of the time that we're talking about Asian Counter-Strike, it's almost with one another. So I feel like we're going to just echo each other's thoughts, and I don't want to just go ahead and say exactly what Pili's just said. So let's throw it over to you to break things up a little bit. What's your take on this whole MVP situation? Like, do you think they should have tried to stick it out?
I feel like, yeah, 100%, right? 100%. But I do believe, I mean, I've heard it's a lot of he said, she said, but what I've heard is like, some of the older players, they weren't happy. I mean, the team weren't happy with each other. They were not really succeeding. And let's be honest, that lineup, that golden lineup they had for a moment there, where they had Stax, Zeta, Zyne, all these guys together, the results weren't that great. But instead of like just hunkering down, sticking it through, and trying to make things work, they kind of like, they had internal fissures, and some of the old guys came back in, and it broke up. So from South Korean Counter-Strike's perspective, this is terrible, right? You have that golden team breaking up, they've spread across. But I don't blame. I'm actually pretty happy with the fact that Lucid Dream picked them up. It still doesn't make sense. The language barrier is all there. But the fact with Thai CS, I'm touching on Thai CS a little bit because it relates to the Korean scene, is because they've been very isolated from the rest of the region as well, right? Not just the rest of Asia, but the rest of SCA as well. And it's just been stagnant. Like, if you watch these teams play, or whenever they have the roster change every couple of weeks, which they have, it's like the same players cycling together. There's no real change in the way they approach the game and whatnot. So maybe the fact that they got Zyne to come in, is it Zyne, right? It is Zyne.
On Lucid, it's Jinx and Likia. Zyne is on BTRG, I think.
Sorry.
They don't have any of the PK players. They have players from outside of
Jinx
PK.
was on PK.
He was their substitute.
But he was on the team.
Yeah, he was on a team, and he did play a few games earlier, if I'm not mistaken, right? So even Jinx, they're getting him in. It's at least some new ideas coming to the lineup, right? And it might shake things up. So from Thai CS's perspective, this is a good move. I don't care who they pick up. They need to pick up some different players from around the region, so they can kind of shake up what they have. Because, like Pili said, there's so many talented players in that country.
It's insane.
It's walking aimbots.
They're literally all so individually skilled. I've seen you can put literally 3 teams together and compete. Like, you could dominate and compete with China in terms of who's the best region. And that's the direction I thought it was heading. And by the way, I don't want to get stuck on Korea for ages and talk about just how PK blew up or whatever, but they couldn't even stick a team out with the option of bringing in a substitute.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's true.
They had a substitute sitting there. Most teams don't even have that. Most teams you have to go looking somewhere else for another
But yeah, it's
player.
because there's no other good teams in Korea, so everyone was like, well, if I can play sub on MVP, it's better than being on fucking whatever the other teams were. Either way, I'm at least glad that like Zeta and Zion, and like I'm not even as interested, for example, in Jinx and Lakia being on Lucid. I'm more interested in seeing on how Zeta's going to go, obviously, with Tyloo, and how Zion's going to go in BTRG. I think you give those teams a little bit of time. I'm not so sold, maybe, on the Tyloo side of things, but for BTRG, like, I can see some good names on that roster. I can see it being a half-decent roster. I think there needs to be some tweaks, but I'm interested to see how they go. Anyway, you said you don't want to touch too much on MVP and stuff. I'll give this to you, Bleh, and then I've got one more point for MVP that I want to talk about, and then we're moving on.
I'm okay with the Zion move to BTRG because I feel like lineup wise it kind of works out. I don't think they're really finalizing a fifth player or like a fourth and fifth player, but the core of impression extra Zion. I think that's something you could work with, right? They're going to be speaking in English. That means you can have more players joining in who are not necessarily, held back by a language barrier who can't like speak some other language. Coming to Zeta joining Tyloo, look, we've seen Tyloo play. Unfortunately, they had to play against the best of the best in Pro League. So you got to look at it with that particular caveat in mind. Playing against FaZe and Mouse Sports and all these guys are never going to be easy, right? But the good thing I saw was that they weren't trying necessarily to like play go full Tyloo, if that makes any sense. They were trying to be more tactical. I saw a lot of cool ideas coming out from them. They kept picking Inferno. They kept losing on Inferno, but the fact that they kept at it, learning from the mistakes, trying to adapt to different play styles, different teams, I think that's a good sign. They're trying to learn, but they're still not there yet. The language issue is always going to be a problem. That's always going to affect their comms. And also the fact that, here's the thing. If this team actually went full Tyloo, I feel they could have won at least more than one map. Apart from the one map they won over G2 and on Dust 2, I feel they could have maybe had like 3 or 4 maps won just by being so unpredictable and random as hell. And then, of course, you have all the players in the team. They can definitely outfrag certain players on a good day, right? But they didn't go that route, which is cool. That's something Tyloo have always struggled with. They'll try to approach a game or a tournament tactically. When that doesn't work out, they just go full Tyloo. A couple of good upsets, a lot of hype, and then they completely crumble in the best of 3 in the playoffs, right? This time around, they stuck with their guns. They tried to, kind of implement what they've been boot camping with, whatever they've been trying to like theorycraft or whatever in that boot camp of theirs. And I think it's a good sign, but they still need a lot of time. So I'm just gonna wait it out, see how it's going to pan out the next couple of months, and then I can form a judgment in Tyloo.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk a little bit more about Chinese Counter-Strike a bit later on. I've got that one last point about MVP, and we obviously, all of us were at Extremesland last year, which, from what I can remember, was the last event that MVP played as a roster, and it was fun times, but maybe not for MVP, and this is where my question comes from. Was that the event that killed the MVP roster, or were they already dead on arrival, Pili?
It's kind of hard to say because it all just comes down to a bunch of internal issues and debates and stuff like that. Whereas, you've got 2 generations of players who can, just have such a big clash between each other, especially in a culture like Korean culture, for example, where, seniority is pretty important and you should really respect the opinions of some older players. That's not really something that usually flies with Counter-Strike. Usually, your youngsters are going to be pretty resistant to the opinions of your more senior players. So I don't know. It's getting into a lot of not Counter-Strike related discussion that I don't have the privy knowledge to. But I just feel like it doesn't matter whether you have a bad event here or there, or you're not able to place where you want to at a tournament like Extremesland. At the end of the day, MVP, they've been a roster that was top 3 in Asia for a long time. They've taken maps off of Tyloo. They've taken series off of a lot of the top teams in Asia. What is the point of capitulating if it was based on that event on one bad result when you've been a top team in Asia? And even if you were going to do that, what's the logic behind we're going to go pick up a player out of a pub server or something like that, or we're going to pick up this guy or that guy, when you had 2 guys who have now stepped into Lucid Dream and started getting some sick results, and you haven't brought either of them into your team, and the players that you have brought on board, they're not doing anything.
Sure, what's your take, Bleh?
I mean, nothing much to add to that. It makes a lot of sense, right? The fact that Tyloo right now are, despite the lack of results, looking good with the addition of Zeta, and then of course you have Zine joining BTRG, who are all looking good as well. And yeah, Pili, I think he hit the nail right. I mean, the hammer on the nail. I'm forgetting what I'm saying, but yeah, he does bring a very valid point over the fact that these players individually are upping the level of the teams that have joined, despite the language barrier, despite the fact that they've been playing with these guys very, very recently. And I think that's a problem. I think it's just internal issues, and I think it's a big, big, big regret they're probably going to have down the line, because this team could have gone places. This team could have done a lot of cool things. They could have probably changed the fifth player out, like Pili said. They had a stand-in as well, right? And maybe no one really knows what really happened. But from what I do believe I spoke to Zeta, and Zeta resigned, I forget, but he did mention like it was just not working out. Like people were just getting angry, frustrated, and there were like inner factions in the team who wanted some of the older players coming back in. I'm talking about like Solo and Glow and all these guys. So I guess it's never going to really pan out, but it's just unfortunate though. I mean, looking at it from an outside perspective, this team could have worked, and that's why still to this day, and this is something you see amongst many other teams, not just these guys, right? And I still stand by the fact that someday in the future, Counter-Strike or the esports title, it's going to be managers who need to handle the team rather than players making decisions, and that's just unfortunate.
I think we've still got a long way to go before that ends up happening. But from my perspective, I kind of feel like they were almost dead on arrival when we got to Extremes Land. Some of their results had been a little bit poor in the lead up to that. And particularly, if you remember, Bleh, when we shared the cab ride to the venue with, I think it was Zeta and Jinx from memory. And it just, like, you could tell Zeta didn't have faith in the team at that point. Like, he was talking a lot about moments and that kind of thing that you don't really, I don't think you really would share that at a time where your team is like absolutely popping off. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that because that was obviously a fairly close conversation. But you, interestingly to me, sort of started talking a little bit about the Thai scene there, Pili, and kind of characterizing it similarly in what I felt like to a way that we characterized the Mongolian scene back in like 2015, right? Where they're just a bunch of aim gods. You've got individuals everywhere. And I want to draw this into a bit of a discussion about the Mongolian scene at the moment, because we're talking about East Asia, which is obviously where MVP Korea have come from. They're not really the big dogs in East Asia anymore. It seems like Mongolian CS is the big dog in East Asia, right? Japan's done. Like, they don't have a good team anymore. Absolute's not really anywhere as far as I'm concerned. And MVP's gone. So is Mongolia back, or is it just a case of the other teams have all kind of gone in the bin?
I think it's both. It's a combination of multiple different things. So obviously, we got to touch on Japan, and it's probably the nation we're going to speak the least about. They had the two teams. The main one was Absolute, obviously, and they had a couple of good players. And Extremes Land, they actually looked pretty good, even playing some pretty structured CS, and they played, were sort of impressing me to a decent degree. But they've now decided not to participate in CS anymore. Honestly, I can't really blame them. I think it happened after a lot of these announcements did come out concerning the Asian region. And that's exactly what I thought when some of those announcements came out regarding Pro League and stuff like that. I was just thinking, how many players is this affecting who they're already, the thoughts in the back of their mind, there's not much for me to play for here. I'm logging on every day, 5-6 hours a day, putting the time in to get good at this video game, hoping that my chance and my opportunity comes along. And then the main source of those opportunities gets taken away. It literally just kills your career. You're not going to commit yourself to that anymore. And when you're already in that sort of should I, shouldn't I mindset, it's going to, push you into that direction. And that's what we saw from Absolute, a team that, a couple of months before, I saw them playing some pretty good CS. The individuals were playing all right. They weren't, amazing. But in regards to, the situation their region was in and how much talent they sort of had, they were doing above expectations. So Japan CS, that's, no longer a thing outside of the Ignis team, who don't look like they were anywhere near the level of Absolute. Then you're looking at Mongolia, who are in that East Asia category. The main competition is obviously Korea, MVP, with a team that came through and took every single East Asia qualifier time and time again. Well. And even sometimes when they were lumped in with China, they were still competing for that top spot. They were still pushing teams like Tyloo to be able to just get themselves to an international event. So now we got the Mongolian teams. The main thing that most people would say is Urcast goes back to Mongolia from a top team, in the region. And, Greyhound was showing decent results overseas, nothing crazy, but in the group stages, they were really pushing some decent teams. That's my Australian bias going. And for some reason, after that happens, a team that was sort of struggling to, a scene that was sort of struggling to get going, starts to have 3 teams that can compete. You've got Marzalai, you've got Tiger now, and even that D13 team in ESEA, which one is it? Let me have a look. ESEA Open Asia Pacific. They just got second place and they beat Splashky's new team.
Yeah,
and they outperformed a lot of other teams. They outperformed Tiger.
Well,
not directly, but they did do it.
Can I just jump in here and say, like, in the minor qualifiers, you had 4 Mongolian teams in East Asia, and the top 3 teams in that subcategory, that East Asia subcategory, were Marzalai, Tiger, and D13. So 3 Mongolian teams. Obviously, aim for R Gaming, whoever that is, they came 8th. So they didn't do too well in the entire qualifier for East Asia. But the fact that they even get in there as the first seed out of the second qualifier kind of speaks for the rest of the competition, in that there's no teams coming from Japan better than them. There's no teams that are better than them from Korea even. Like, there used to be 2 half decent Korean teams, but now it just seems like it's like all Mongolia.
They're the only scene that hasn't capitulated.
Yeah, and it's also because I do believe that most of the Mongolian teams, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I do believe both Marzalai and Tiger are sponsored by Chinese orgs, or rather the Chinese orgs, which have taken the Mongolian team. So they do have the money to support them. Meanwhile, for Japan, like you mentioned, Pili, like it's a dead scene, right? Unfortunate, but it's the fact. CS was never that big in Japan, and apart from that run they had in the Face It minor, it kind of went downhill from there. South Korea, we've been speaking about them for a while. Hong Kong never really had a scene. Had a couple of decent pub players. That's about it. So East Asia, there's literally no competition for the Mongolians, and I think that's made them look so good, right? Apart from that, I've been privy to a few of the scrim results. Obviously, scrim results, so you're gonna take that with that bucket of salt. But they haven't been necessarily like stomping the rest of the other teams. I'm talking about, forget the Chinese teams, but like, even against SCA teams, the results have been pretty all right. They win some, they lose some. They're kind of like middle of the pack. But the fact that East Asia is right now the easiest qualifier for the minors makes things so much better for the Mongolians. So, I mean, Machine Gun comes back out of like 3 years in the wilderness, riding horses and just being a badass, just like riding bikes, whatever he does, like hunting like wildebeest. I don't think the wildebeest in Mongolia, but whatever, right? Just being a badass, comes back and just beats Urkas and Dobu's team out of nowhere and qualifies at a minor.
Yeah, and we all sort of thought those OG Mongolian players were kind of burnt toast. Like, every time I saw them in a team, I was like, these guys are going nowhere. Urkas and Dobu and whoever else they have in their sort of rosters are going to be the new kings of Mongolia. And all of a sudden, it sort of seemed like we're back 4 years ago.
Return of the king, baby.
Who the fuck is Urkas? Who the fuck is Dobu? I don't care. Give me Zilkenberg and Sogu and Machine Gun, obviously. NCL. Yeah. So, look, I don't know what's happening with Mongolian CS. I'm not sure that they're quite there, obviously, as a large contender on the entire Asian scene, but certainly within East Asia, it seems like they have the cake at the moment.
Yeah, well, they're in the best position for a lot of reasons. Like, they've got those couple of teams, and that just doesn't mean that, okay, look, they've got a couple of teams just off the virtue of the fact that you don't have any competition for them. You're talking about, an opportunity for, say, one of them goes well internationally and they get the opportunities. It's the same thing that we see in Australia, right? You're going to see potentially whoever's the top dog, the king team, they're just going to get their hand pick of whoever else they want from the scene and be able to build the strongest squad possible.
Yeah, I agree. I still feel like Urcast is slowly still ramping up. I know it's been a while right now, but I mean, he's a player I really do respect, and whatever and he obviously has way more experience compared to any of the Mongolian teams, players rather, on that side, right? So I'm still hoping to see Tiger do well given some time, but time is running out. I mean, it's been quite a few months right now. We expect him to do something to change, not lose randomly. But then again, man, Asia, I don't want to bring this up, but online CS, it's always the thing. You can't really count that out. And especially online CS in Asia, it's all about the ping, Sometimes you're lucky and you get like a really good server and you have like 50 ping. It's a decision between 50 ping, which is really good ping for some of the Mongolian East Asian players, mind you, compared to like 300 for that matter, depending on the TO, depending on the qualifier happening. So as much, it sucks that we have to rely on his results, But yeah, this is the only results we have. But it's really hard to gauge. But I think the overall sentiment that Asian CS right now, from an eye test, it's looked the worst. Everyone, including your Tyloos and even Vici.
Yeah.
So
We'll touch on that a little bit
rough
as well
times.
when we get further on.
Sorry?
We're going to touch on China as well in
Oh, yeah,
depth, but that's pretty much East Asia wrapped up. There's not that much going on in East Asia, where last year I felt like it was actually the second strongest region behind China. But anyway, let's talk about ANZ Counter-Strike, which is in a bit of an interesting place right now, because never have I ever really felt like ANZ Counter-Strike has been the strongest region domestically within Asia. Obviously, the Renegades 100 Thieves roster notwithstanding, they were the best without a doubt. But once they moved overseas and very rarely played in the Asian tournaments, I sort of considered them an international team as opposed to a domestic team. And then China with Tyloo and Vici was still probably the strongest. But now it starts to feel like, with obviously the current Renegades and the likes of Order and Avant looking very, very strong, that actually ANZ Counter-Strike might be the strongest region in Asia. Is that a fair statement, Pili, or do you have another leg to stand on?
I personally don't think that it's that straightforward, and it never will be, just due to the nature of how these Asian competitions usually happen. You know, we have a bunch of teams and players competing in separate sub-regions, getting used to certain players that they're used to playing against, just due to being grouped into these different categories by TOs and being able to qualify for tournaments. And then they go and they play against Australians, and the eye test will tell you, oh, X team is probably better, but there's so many extenuating circumstances that can lead you in the wrong direction in terms of getting the real level of a team, and in terms of, you know, understanding exactly how good someone is when they come into contact with another team. And that's what we see at the Asian Minor all the time. Like, you will see these, like, I'll just use Thailand for an example, you know, looking absolutely sick online in Pro League and stuff like that. And then you're going to see, you know, potentially them going on to a LAN competition and not even play even close to that level against some other teams that they have really, really struggled on LAN against. They, you know, will really struggle to beat them, but then online they'll smash them. And, you know, same thing for Boot when we see them go to international tournaments. If they look good online, they're smashing out Asia. They've even beaten Tyloo to take an international opportunity. Then they go and play in ANZ, or they go to IEM Sydney or something like that, and they're not really doing that well. They're not doing well against international teams either.
Okay, so I want to throw this one your way, Bleh, because we've heard from Pili, but does it even matter if ANZ is better than Asia right now? Like, because from what I can see, for the next 6-9 months even of this year, we're not even going to really see Australian teams play against Asian teams in any kind of qualifier. The Asian Minor doesn't exist anymore. The two qualifiers are now separate. You send one ANZ team, you send one Asian team. They're never going to play each other. So is it even a discussion that's worth having?
I think it is, despite the fact that, you know, like you said, like the qualifiers are different and all of that. But historically, at least when it comes to CSGO, it's always been Australian, Asian region later clumped together for the minors, right? I think it's I think I always look forward to that, so that we can really see how these teams, like how these two regions stack against each other, because they're so close by geographically speaking. And also know some of the teams based in Perth, Western Australia, they do tend to scrim with some of the Singaporean teams, because they do ping well there, or at least they used to, if I remember it right. It's interesting, right? Like, if you look at Extremes Land, where we're all there, the two teams who came there, Ground Zero and Genuine,
Yep.
I think. Yeah,
And Genuine are now Chiefs.
Chiefs, got the current Chiefs right now, and obviously, you know, a lot of other extenuating circumstances as to why they were there, but they did not impress me at all in Extremes Land. Like, it was quite shocking the way. I mean, you guys would say like they're going to really be struggling against these teams, but if you look at Extremes Land, a pure Asia Australia only tournament, and apart from the usual suspects in Tyloo and, you know, Vici, you're like, you know, these guys have a real shot of, you know, having a deep run, but they didn't, and they struggled quite a bit. And I think it's good to have these sort of competitions where we can gauge these two teams against each other, because many of the Aussie teams I've spoken to, they've always been like, you know, obviously when you play in a small domestic circuit, again, keeping your ex-Greyhound guys and 100 Thieves and, you know, currently Renegades guys separately. The rest of them, they've just been used to playing the same competition. You play against the Asian teams, and some of them just going to play with no respect. And I think it's a good wake-up call for some of the Aussie teams. And the same thing can be said for some of the Asian teams, like you said, like your like Boot Dreamscape, for example, when they go and play against some of the Aussie teams, they struggle quite a bit as well. And I think it's good because if you look at the region as a whole, there's not much of great competition. So, you need to take whatever chances you get. But coming back to your question, Jordan, I still think it matters. Yes, they're not going to be playing against each other, but I think, like I said, geographically speaking, historically speaking, I think these two regions kind of like go hand in hand. I think it's also my favorite rivalry is still going to be Tyloo and old Renegades.
Old Renegades, 100 Thieves, right?
Yeah, 100 Thieves now. Yeah, never going to see them play each other though. So that's
What about you, Pili? Do you think this is something that matters right now, or is it something that we need to hold off and sort of start discussing again when 2021 rolls around? And like in theory, right? I don't think that this current RMR system is going to be the same for 2021. I'd assume they'll go back to the Asia minors and or all the other minors, obviously, but the whole minor system, right? I think that works really well. So I don't think this is like a permanent thing, right? This is temporary, in my opinion. But right now, it just doesn't seem like ANZ and Asian CS are going to cross over all that much.
Yeah, and I think like I was saying before, with the sub-regions and stuff like that, when you divide it up, I feel like the ANZ players have got a little bit more to play for at the moment. They've got a little bit more to think about. We do have some regional tournaments, some grassroots tournaments that we run over here, whereas, you look through some of these Asian teams, like I was doing it earlier when I was doing some research, and I'm trying to find what are these guys playing in? What are they doing? And there's just very little to go off of. There's very little, at least on HLTV, maybe they have their own other tournaments outside of that, but it just seems like a huge sea of inactivity. And at the end of the day, it's not even a question of like skill. It's not even a question of, who's better or what. It's just a question of the ANZ teams are playing more than the Asian teams. They have more to play for. They have more motivation. So, not 9 times out of 10, if that's the way it's going to be, you're going to see them become better as a region. And you'll see that with, Europe over a lot of other, potential regions. They're a lot better because they have more to play for. They've had a longer period of time where they've had a sustainable scene, and they've got more options in terms of practice. It's the same thing. You have more competitions for ANZ teams to play in. They're going to have better opportunities to practice and more motivation.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the ANZ scene because they are characterized as ANZ, not part of Asia anymore, as part of this RMR system. So I think it's quite relevant for us to sort of discuss the top end of things. Now, Bleh, it shouldn't really be too much of a surprise to say Renegades are undoubtedly the top of the scene. I assume I'm not going to get any argument from you there.
No, okay. 100%. I think they've proven it like time and time again. It's not what you say.
And same for you, Pili, right?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously had that period where we were seeing Greyhound play teams like Orders, teams like the old Chiefs, pretty much nonstop. And then we were wondering, who's going to be the top dog out of these teams. And Greyhound won almost every single time. So they've proven, I mean, Greyhound now being Renegades, they've proven by far that they're the best team. You can't even argue it. I don't think there is any argument you could make.
But this is where things get pretty interesting, right? And I guess it maybe you can argue it doesn't get interesting because there is now only one slot for ANZ. But between Order and Avant right now, there's obviously that rivalry starting to appear. Chiefs have kind of fallen off, but who's to say that they won't come back into the swing of things and compete well in these RMRs? But Pili, is there anyone right now that can challenge Renegades? Or is it like is it even worth watching these qualifications? Or are we going to get Renegades dominating everything again, just like what we saw in the Rio quals?
I think we're going to get them dominating everything again, but we come back time and time again to watch them and keep our interest, Jordan, at least between us, because we're always casting them and we're always getting hype and excited for them. Is that, who is going to push them? Who's going to, take maps off of them and stuff like that? I mean, we see Avant playing pretty well, like you said. Order, they're a massive discussion point because, usually you're talking about when you've got one of these smaller regions that only gets certain amount of opportunities, certain amount of chances to go overseas, you're thinking about how much experience the players have. Well, it's almost arguable that a team like Order, with some of the players that they've got coming into their roster, have really, really, moved up and gotten an advantage in a way that you can't conventionally get. You've got some really experienced players on that lineup now, who are going to be able to deal with the pressure, that are going to be able to foster some of these younger players to, get even better than they already are in ways that aren't to do with how you can play Counter-Strike in, maturity and experience and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say they're going to be the big opportunity and the big contender of anybody to take them out, as well as Avant. Some decent experience coming into that roster, but overall the firepower is pretty interesting for me. I just still think Renegades is a little bit too good, and they've proven it so many times. It's almost depressing, when you get that what is it, like the article that tells you, oh, it's one slot. It's one slot again.
Yeah.
Like
it's Renegade slot again. That's what's really disappointing even for the Asian scene as well. Like if you think about the fact that there could have been 2 teams going, probably, let's say it's probably Renegades and Vici. And then you've still got that 3rd slot, so there's still something to play for all these other teams. But now, 1 from Renegades, 1 from Asia, 1 from Renegades. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. 1 from ANZ, 1 from Asia. It's Renegades and Vici, maybe Tyloo, depending on how they perform as well. But what does everyone else have to play for at this point? I'm going to throw this next one to you, Bleh, because you sort of talked about the genuine now Chiefs roster that you saw playing at Extremesland. And for a while in ANZ, for your context, if you haven't been watching that much ANZ Counter-Strike, which I would forgive you for, we were sort of talking about Chiefs as potentially being one of the top contenders for this season of ANZ Champs. Turns out they got knocked out before even qualifying for finals. They didn't even really get into playoffs, if you were to call it playoffs. So from your perspective, when you saw them playing at Extremesland, you said you were disappointed. How did you feel about them compared to some other previous rosters that you've seen from the ANZ scene? I'm not talking specifically previous Chiefs rosters or anything like that, but you've obviously seen a lot of teams go internationally from ANZ, the likes of maybe Tainted Minds back in the day, the old Order rosters, all that kind of stuff. How do they sort of stack up against this genuine roster? And was it like a bit of a surprise, maybe in your eyes, to see them playing so poorly?
By the way, as well, I want to say there's a huge asterisk here, is that they literally at that tournament did not have their most important player.
This is true.
They didn't have their in-game leader and Orpa, who has absolutely massive gains for them. They were playing with their coach. So
I want to kind of get an idea of where you think they sit in comparison to some of the other teams in ANZ history.
From an outsider. Yeah, I mean, seeing them in Extremesland it was a while back though, like almost half a year now, if you really think about it, right? Like 5 months. Yeah,
would have been November, December.
It was November, right? So it's been almost 6 months now, going on 6 months. The thing with them are, obviously they were very, very new, what I saw of them over there, and they were more happy just to be there rather than just like kind of try and win and whatnot. So I was like, whatever. But let me put it this way: compared to like Avant or Order or Renegades for that matter, yeah, they don't really match up with them, right? But one thing I've noticed about the Oceanic scene is whenever there was like this one team who stepped up, or one team who really started to make waves, was always a bunch of young players, right? A bunch of like comparatively unknown guys. You had the old Vox guys back in the day, if you remember, and then I mean, after that, what happened? Well, which was the Renegades lineup, which really started to make a name for itself, was there was barely any members remaining from that Vox lineup. It was Aza and JKS, right? Those are the core 2 guys, and apart from that, the old guys left and newer guys coming in. So it's like I always look up to the newer players, kind of making a mark. So that's why I have faith in the Chiefs team. But the problem here I see is the fact that I don't really see. Again, I obviously don't know the Oceanic scene as well as you guys do, but I don't really see any names who I remember from a few years back, for that matter. I don't see any veterans, so to speak, in this lineup, and I think that could be the one anchor kind of like holding them back. You would want to see some of the, some at least one player, doesn't have to be necessarily the in-game leader, but one player has maybe played in the old Chiefs lineup, or maybe has played in some of the more tenured teams in the region, right? And I think that the lack of that could be something holding these guys back.
I think that's a fair point. And you also make a good point in saying that they were sort of a very fresh team, at least to the international scene. They had been playing together for quite a long time domestically within ANZ, but had never really sort of been up towards the top of the scene, and certainly were not close to qualifying for anything. And if you remember, they obviously didn't even qualify for Extremesland. They got that sort of ordered berth because Order and Chiefs, I think it were, or couldn't go through. So it's a little bit of an interesting topic. I mean, they need, I think, a lot more time in terms of international competitions before they're going to be really a heavy hitter on that kind of a stage. But it seems to me like they have dropped off a little bit. Pili, do you think they come back, or is this kind of the end of that team before they make like a roster change or something?
Yeah, I think you've got a lot of talented players still on that roster. In fact, I think most of the players from that roster can compete at that level. I think the problem for them has always been that their players are wildly inconsistent. and their firepower is a little bit how you going. Like at the end of the day, a lot of the time they really lean heavily on the chemistry and being a little bit more prepared than other teams, being a little bit more well practiced. They put the effort in that's gotten them that spot in the region. This new Chiefs lineup, but I don't think this iteration of the roster, like most people aren't aware, but the core of this team has been together for like 2 years or more. Like they have stuck it out in multiple different iterations of this roster, made a couple of player changes here or there. But at the end of the day, I feel like they have slowly improved and slowly got themselves into a position where they can push some of the top teams. But I feel like they need just that something more. They need something different at this point, and I think that'll have to be a player change. The thing is that usually the question that you have when you think about a player change is, who are you going to remove, and why? And there's usually a pretty straightforward answer, and it's usually based on stats, or you think one player's underperforming, or you think someone isn't doing his role properly, or somebody has a certain like a personality clash or something like that. I think in this team, it doesn't matter who you remove. I think Apoc Dud's essential, in my opinion. I think he's the core of the team, and you cannot remove him because he's the in-game leader in the AWPA. But I don't actually think that there's much of an argument with the other four to say you can't remove or you can remove this guy. I almost think like it doesn't matter as long as you remove somebody from a role and you bring somebody else in. And I'm not saying that that player is necessarily bad. I think any of those guys can go and slot into another team and play just as well. But I just think that the core of the team is too stagnant. And I think that they need to bring somebody who specializes in something or other into the team and gives them a little bit of a new look, a little bit of a breath of life, as well as some decent coaching, which I know they're trying to get. You had Yam in the server before trying to coach them. They also, I thought Oxy did a pretty decent job coaching the team, although I don't know much about it internally. I know that he would be a good candidate for something like that. I feel like they need a change, and I don't think it matters what it is for once. I think that you can just go and try and chuck something else in there, especially in the position that they're in. They've just started to trend downwards. They haven't made playoffs in ANZ champs. For once, it's not that discussion of you can't change something or they'll be in a bad position or much worse than they are. I feel like now they're in that bad position. Now it's a good time for a change, and it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough, right? They didn't qualify for Rio. They kind of went the distance. They almost got there against Order, but didn't manage to pick that up either. So there's not that many results to speak of for Chiefs to argue that they shouldn't make a change. Either way, let's move on from ANZ. We've talked about it enough. And we move on to China now, which we did sort of talk about a little bit at the start of the broadcast here. We're obviously all in agreement that Vici and Tyloo are at the top of things, but from your opinion here, Bleh, is there like much below Vici and Tyloo? Because we were talking about it a little bit before, and you sort of were like, who the fuck cares about the rest of the Asian scene in general? So, right, there mustn't be anything left in China, right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm not gonna argue with that. Like, it's sad. It's sad that these two teams, and here's the sad part, right? I mean, Tyloo, look at it this way. They lose their star player. The best player in Asia, Bentet, leaves and joins Genji, right? Like, God bless. I mean, I hope he does well. He's doing pretty well as well for himself. I think he's fitting pretty well with Automatic and all those guys. We could talk about Bentet a little bit, Someone's escaped the evil hell that is Asian Counter-Strike. But think about it. They had all these options of all the Chinese players, and they decided to go with Zeta. Again, taking nothing away from Zeta. The guy is a beast. He's such a solid player, good understanding the game, is very outgoing as well, speaks a lot, and is willing to like leave South Korea, join China, join a Chinese team and all that. But it just makes no sense to me. You would rather pick up any other Asian Chinese player and slot him into the lineup, and it could potentially work. It would just nullify the entire language barrier, which has always been a problem for this team, right? And I'm sure Tyloo thought about this, but the fact that they did not go for that, they still went for Zeta, just goes to show that there's a complete dearth of talent. There's a lack of good players. They did try with a couple of other players. I forgot his name. There was a guy
Danking.
Danking, who turned out to be, from what I've heard, that he is kind of a piece of shit. That's what I've heard from a number of sources. And they tried a couple other players as well, like players who I felt were pretty good fits, but they were like, no, they're terrible. And I'm not going to argue against the Tyloo guys. They are still the best team in the region, or at least historically they were the best team. They've been playing at the highest levels. They have qualified for so many lands and whatnot. So if they say that these guys aren't fitting into the lineup, I'm going to believe them, right? But now I have to question the rest of China. Like, what the fuck is going on with the rest of the players? Where are all the players? You have so many people watching CS, playing CS. You have so many teams. I'm just looking through HLTV. You have the players from eHome, Linvision, Jijihao, I think that's how you pronounce it. We have Wubba Lubba Dub Dub, which is basically Savage's fun team, I guess. You got Savage and TV over there. You got Aster, Invictus, R-Stars, 1-3, all these teams. And Tyloo have the money and the resources to pick up any one of these players. They didn't. There is a reason behind that, and the reason being it's just shitty players overall, apart from Vici and Tyloo, and that's so unfortunate.
I mean, is it just shitty players, or is it that like Tyloo maybe have this thing with their core roster where the core roster, the guys that are making the decisions, just don't seem to have any faith in anyone in the Chinese region, such that they would rather go outside of the region. Like I can't believe that you could tell me that in all of China they can't find a good player that could fit into that Tyloo roster, Pili.
I just want to touch on one quick thing there, right? I think you answered your own question there, Jordan. The fact that they don't believe in any Chinese players, I mean, it's quite telling, isn't it?
Yeah, look, Bleh has already given you a pretty comprehensive list of a lot of Chinese players. The truth is that there's even more than that. You've got the guys who were on Invictus before, you're talking about like Equal, X-Pro, Flying, some of those guys. You've got the guys who are on R-Stars, HD, Bottle. You got Shuada Pai. You've also got the team that Dan King came for. They had some guys who've been playing pretty good online, like Destroyer or like Marek or someone like that. Slowly, that's Dan King's team as well. He's playing pretty good. Let's not even forget. Here's the guys that everyone's forgotten about. What about 1-3? And I think 1-3 is the perfect example of why the decisions that Tyloo make are actually correct at the end of the day. Because here's a bunch of guys that they chose not to play with. What are they doing now? Tyloo are still overseas. Tyloo are still getting those international spots. Yeah, they don't really look good doing it a lot of the time. But they've chosen not to play with certain players, and those players are not succeeding in spite of that. They haven't shown us anything since going out of Tyloo. DD used to be like one of the stars of Asia. This guy was insane. Captain Mo could play on an international stage as well. Those guys aren't doing anything inside China anymore. There's so many Chinese players, and I feel like there is potential that you could put together so many different kinds of lineups that could actually do, some damage and could be competitive in terms of the grand scheme of the rest of Asia. But I don't know. Maybe I'm overrating them, and at the end of the day, the results speak for themselves.
Well, this is the crazy thing to me, right? As well, is like you've seen so many individuals go through Vici, go through Tyloo, and be at the top of the Chinese scene and at the top of the Asian scene in general, and yet there is no like concrete third best team in China. You could argue there was towards the end of last year with IG, but like, what the fuck happened to them?
Here's another thing though, as well. Let's go to Vici, right? They had that Frankie guy who's now on that Wubba Lubba Dub Dub team, the fun team or whatever. He's okay. But out of everybody that they could have picked, you have, again, that eHome team. You've got that 1-3 team. You've got Invictus. Vici, out of everybody, picked this jam young guy that I have never heard of. Instead of any of those guys playing in its established teams, they picked him, and they were right.
So basically the TLDR here, Blair, is that there's just no individuals coming through the ranks in China.
That's... Okay, I'm going to throw in another theory here, right? It's also the fact that the Chinese scene, all these players are talking about, these are like new breed Counter-Strike players, right? They're not like 1.6ers or Sourcers. I don't think they ever played Source back in China. But anyway, there is something I've been harping on time and time again, is a lack of leadership in Counter-Strike in Asia as a whole, and China in particular as well. When I talk about leadership, I'm not talking about being a tactical in-game leader, but being a leader of men, being a captain of a team, right? Someone that you respect. The only other player here is Advent, but then again, there is this entire... It kind of reminds you of North America, like back in the beginning of CSGO, where all these young players, these are like pug stars. They play on the local Chinese platform. They just like out-aim everyone, right? These are like walking aimbots. But if you can't outfrag them, or if you can't like play at their level of mechanical skill, they just don't respect you. It doesn't matter how smart you are or whatnot. They just don't respect you. And I think that's the biggest problem in China right now. Even when Tyloo had Dan King stand in for a while, it was the fact that he just didn't give a fuck He was just playing the way he wanted to. And for me, that's shocking. I'm like, listen, man, you're almost a nobody. You haven't achieved anything in your life in Counter-Strike apart from winning, maybe placing second or top 3 in some of these inconsequential online cups, and you get pulled up for fucking Tyloo. I mean, for fucking Tyloo, and you're just gonna like have that attitude. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I kind of have an inkling that a lot of these players are like that. And how do you fix that, right? It's just a cultural problem with many of these players that they just don't give a fuck about playing the right way. And even if there might be a couple of teams like Tyloo who are doing it right now, and Vici who have Advent, or even Carsa for that matter, you know, when you have these 3 teams or these 3 players who could be very good leaders for these young and up-and-coming players, if there's no respect, you're never going to form a team. So I think it's 2 things. Firstly, yeah, like there seems to be a lack of talent, but the second thing, even though there are players who do have the talent, they just don't seem to really respect the teams they're joining or the style of Counter-Strike they're looking to play. I think they just look at it as a game, which is funny because it is a game, but they don't look at it from any level of professionalism at all.
Maybe there just isn't like a level of respect within China for the top teams. Like for Tyloo, they're to us like a massive name. They're such a big deal in Asian Counter-Strike, but maybe Chinese players just don't care.
I mean, even in Tyloo, they have some degree of that as well. Like they've always just been that team who's tried to individually outfrag other people. And even when you've had elements of coaching come in, like you had Jonta come in and stuff like that, you know, they didn't necessarily play better in those circumstances. Those Tyloo players, you know, they almost suffered individually. They looked like they were extremely uncomfortable trying to play US Counter-Strike, and their performance level went down.
Well, so many problems that we need to try and fix here in China, and I guess it's not up to us, is it? My real one hope, though, is that someone can make Chinese Counter-Strike great again, because that would be bringing back the golden age of Asian CS.
Mate, you can literally, you get the right combination of players and you solve some personality issues. And this is speculation, you know. Bleh probably knows a little bit, but for us in AZ, we have we are pretty disconnected from the Asian scene, but you know, just from the names on paper, you can put together like 3 or 4 pretty good teams from a lot of these names from China. If those players are actually playing to a good level, you know, if they're playing proper CS, there's so much talent, but it feels like it's just, you know, you got all these tools and you got no one who knows how to use it.
I'll give an example, right? I'm sure you guys remember the Cold 1v4 in Mirage against Tyloo, like a week back. Yeah, he had a deagle. He was an A-side.
Oh
Mirage.
yeah, they all. Yep.
And they gave him 4 separate 1v1s, right? And that's Tyloo. They played, and obviously they played it terribly. And again, they forgot that it's Cold motherfucking Zera, right? And now take that approach to that 4v1, and bear in mind that happens to even some of the best teams out there, right? But when you're Tyloo, you're a massive underdog playing against a FaZe who have looked the best in years. And you're going to give an opportunity like that to a player of his caliber. That's, you know, you just being a little too loose with the way you're approaching the game. Now take that idea and multiply that by a factor, I don't know, like 1 million. That is the average Chinese player right there. That's the average Asian player right there. They live and die by the sword, by the gun, or whatever you want to call it. They just want to go out frag. They're like, oh, Cold Zera, Nico, I'm just going to outdo. If I kill him, it's going to be so cool. They don't think about playing Counter-Strike the way we look at it. Like, win the round, win the game, nothing else matters. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how, I mean, I'm sure we all agree on that. But for them, it just, like I said, they've just been taught and they've learned to play CS the way where they want to be the star. They're not willing to sacrifice, not willing to listen. They think they know best. And that's not just Chinese CS players' problem. I think that's the average Asian region as a whole. And listen, man, if I had a stick big enough, dude, I'd be the shit out of that, dude.
You need a very long do not peek stick to hit everybody in China, Blair.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying, mate.
I could probably drop a mail or DM to Sir Scoots. I'm like, Scoots, I think it's time you gave me that stick. Like NACS, they don't need that anymore. Like they have Liquid, they have EG, they have all these, even Smoke Patrol. Everyone's doing well. The NA scene has matured. That baseball bat needs to be passed on to Asia. I'll take good care of it. Whack everyone. Like I imagine standing behind Tyloo in that 1v4, just hitting each and every one of them on the back of the head.
Somebody literally would probably have to go to hospital after one map. He wouldn't make it to the
probably
best of 3.
He'd probably look. Here's the thing with somebody, right? I feel like if you force him, if he tries playing correct Counter-Strike, like correct Counter-Strike, I think he's just gonna become a bot, like a bottom fragger. He's not gonna do it at all. He's just the most fucking like. It's genius, but it's like mad genius. I don't know how to describe his style. I think he is the most unique player in Counter-Strike ever.
I feel like you could go for 2 hours just on Tyloo, to be honest. But
honestly,
we probably should talk about some other
knowing
stuff.
you guys, you could probably go for 2 hours just on somebody. I know how much you guys like to talk about him.
Somebody has, dude. Like, listen, man. I didn't have gray hair, right? Like, he's ruined my life like so many times. And like, why are you doing this? I've broken a keyboard because of somebody.
One Counter-Strike player from China has just totally ruined your life. That's really unfortunate to hear.
But I love him. I love him at the same time, because when he does some of that wild walking through with smoke and like Zeusing a guy, knifing the second guy, and like two tapping the other two guys, that's what I'm like. Yes, fuck yes, you mad beautiful motherfucker. I love
he
you.
does it the next round and dies, and you're literally fucking raging. Yeah. Anyway,
no, not the next round, the next 10 rounds. But yeah, anyway, we can't keep sticking to somebody.
Speaking of
not a good idea.
Speaking of like roster mania and combinations and all that shit that you could do with the Chinese scene, I think we're kind of at that point with SEA Counter-Strike, where obviously with Boot Dreamscape just completely obliterating themselves and moving into a bunch of different teams, that really has opened a lot of doors for, well, actually not even only Boot Dreamscape, but with MVP as well, obviously, because most of their players have actually ended up in SEA. We've got this mad, like, melting pot of random players in a bunch of different teams that has made SEA Counter-Strike actually a very interesting prospect for us this year, Pili. The unfortunate situation is we haven't really been able to get to watch that much of SEA Counter-Strike.
No, we haven't. I don't think we've really seen them have very much to play in. One of the main things, I mean, I'm looking at some of those teams and what the recent competitions they've been able to play in are. You know, we've got this ESEA Open is the most recent one at the end of last month. Early on from that, it's literally Rio. And before that, it's this WX Invitational in January. And that's it. Nothing even happened over a whole month of February. There wasn't even a single tournament recorded on HLTV. It's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, you said it, MVP, a couple of Korean players getting in the mix into Southeast Asia. That's pretty wild. Thailand, still tons and tons of different players you could throw into different teams and different mixes. And I don't know if you're going to bring up that graphic, but I still have the faith in Thailand. Maybe we'll talk about that in the middle. But the same thing as well with Boot. You've got players going to BTRG. I mean, Impression, it's been a while since we've on Boot, but they have a interesting roster. I don't know if they have the right combination of players, but they've certainly got an impressive core. You've got that Huatsai team just going full Singapore, which is interesting. They still do have a couple of decent players. They've basically taken half of Boot and merged it in with Lays. I don't know how that's necessarily going to work. I'm not sure if they have a high enough quality of players across the board to make that work. You got that Paper X team, which is the other half of Boot, the Indonesian and it's Indo and Singapore mix, I think, which is
with a Malaysian as well.
Oh yeah, Devai. You can't forget Devai. Literally, I think on his day, arguably better and more dynamic of a player than Kaze, but that he hasn't really shown. He had his opportunity to show it internationally, and when he has gone international, Boot don't do anything on land, so I'm not sure that he'd be able to even show how much he's worth.
Yeah. So let's start to break this down a little bit more, right? Because you've gone through 3 teams there, and I sort of want to touch on these individually because they're all really, really interesting teams to me. BTRG, obviously the first one, and this was the team that was created last year. Impression at the helm. You've had Excurate there for a while now, but obviously with MVP all falling apart, they've added Zion onto this roster. And what's your take here, Bleh? Because to me, as Pili said, this looks like they've got a good core there. Impression, Excurate, and Zion, I think is a pretty good core. I'm not sold on a Dren King, and I have no idea who Z-Win is. But if they sort of work this roster, mold this roster a little bit...
I don't think they even have a Dren King anymore.
Well, whoever it is, it doesn't even matter who their 5th is. When you've got Impression, Excurate, and Zion, that's enough to build a team around, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good core. Excurate, obviously, like, let's not forget, man, he was in-game league with Tyloo for a bit, right? And that was also the time where they were having quite a bit of success. And with Impression calling right now, I think they're like co-calling is what Impression and Excurate like chiming in together. That means that he's more freed up. He can do more stuff. Definitely a good core. Design, we all know what he can do. Guy's a beast. Whatever gun you give to him, and Adrian King, he's been around for a while. Yeah,
It says they have Dreamer and Z-Win on their HLTV. Their last,
I don't know how legit.
But
that
who's
is,
this
so-
Hey
the
B
last,
guy as well?
the last game that they had literally 7 different people playing.
This is okay. Fuck this.
Can I link something? They literally they had Zine, some guy called Start, Excurate, Z-Win, Adren King, Impression, and some heist guy. They had like 7 different people playing one best of 3.
You know,
What?
okay,
Yeah,
I have to
I
go
saw-
back
I
and
saw
talk
that.
about this, right? Because this is literally fucking Impression all over, right? Back when he was on boot, they would have like a rotating 7-man core. I don't know what is going on with this guy, and I'm sure it's not his fault. Maybe it is. And if it is, what the fuck's going on? But like, can teams not just have like an 8-man rotating core when they have Impression on the team? Like, it seems like a curse.
I don't know what's going on here, man. I'm looking at the match page you're talking about, Pili, the one with Beyond, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what the fuck? All right, here's the thing. The core is good, but I don't think they've really found their 4th and 5th. Adrian King, however you want to pronounce his name, he hasn't really like struck me as someone who... He's a good pug star. He kind of made his name, playing pugs in the SEA region, but hasn't really impressed me at all in any team, professionally or semi-professionally for that matter. Z-Win, High Beast, Start... Dude, I have no... Listen, man, the comedy agency is expert and all that. I have no fucking idea who these guys are. I'm sorry. I'm gonna hold off BTRG for a while. I want to see them like solidify in a particular lineup and then see what they do with that. But right now, I mean, I don't want to say it, but it's just like they're not doing anything, right? They haven't really upped their game too much. They are kind of like in the top 5 in China right now. But apart from that, I mean, they haven't shown me anything. Like, there's nothing impressive coming out from them. They haven't had any good runs, couple of good wins here and there, but they also lose against teams they shouldn't be losing to. I mean, this is a team once upon a time who would have just wiped the floor with any Thai team, right? And they couldn't even do that this time around.
That's the thing for me is like when I saw this roster created last year, I was like, fucking sick. This team is going to be a real challenger. And then they just did nothing. Like, they didn't even get deep in tournaments. They got knocked out pretty early on before we got to the late stages or even to the upper bracket, lower bracket. They didn't even get to like lower bracket finals or anything like that, which is insane for me for the quality of players that they had on the team at the time. And even now with the addition of Zion, like, you have to look at that roster and say they should be able to do something. Like, they should be able to win this SEA region. But you've still got Lucid and Beyond in front of them by, I would say, a pretty hefty margin. Do you have anything more you want to say for BTRG here, Pili?
Yeah, they just need to grab a couple of different players. To be honest, like, even Impression has never really impressed me too much. I never made a good impression. He's average, but he definitely knows how to play some decent CS. In that boot roster, he was playing basically EUCS. He's got a good head on his shoulders, but he's not carrying any games. This guy is just someone who's a role player who's going to be able to be a functional part of a good team, and he knows how to play some decent CS, but he's not going to be doing, wonders for your team. At the end of the day, this is a Zion and Excurate show, and the stats show that. They're the only 2 guys who are playing half decently, and they're the only reason that this team is relevant. Impression can stay if you're able to find some other guys, but like, imagine if Boot split, right? And that happened after this BTRG team came together, a while after. Where was whoever's in charge of BTRG taking someone like Devi or trying to get someone like Benkai or trying to get somebody from Boot? Where was, the person?
I don't think anyone's going to be joining Impression. I'm not too sure about the situation surrounding him leaving the team, but from what I've heard, what I've gauged, it wasn't exactly pretty. So I don't think that was going to happen.
All right, replace him then. Get somebody else.
The problem is, I think,
right, but he's not irreplaceable.
I think Impression is the team for BTRG. Like, I think he was the first guy.
Yeah, so was MPK, mate.
Well,
where's
you're
he
right.
at?
Listen, Matt. Excurate needs to just tell his younger brother to like
fucking please
sign a contract.
I don't understand.
You'd literally never give this one up,
No, I'm 100%.
The real Forsaken. The real Forsaken. He's gonna come out and he's just gonna fucking shit on everyone.
Imagine Extreme Slam 2020, the new guy called Forsaken rolls up. The admins, there's like 6 admins behind his PC. This one guy,
and it's just like dropping 50 bombs, right?
half a meter away with binoculars on his screen. Just
Oh,
I don't know how many people know this, but yeah, for those of you watching who have no idea who this one is, this kid's like Exkurt's younger brother. He was like 13 when I saw him play. I think he's now like 15 or something. He's still in school. He's a beast. He's not as smart as an Exkurt or Bente when it comes to like in-game smart,
Still
so
young.
to speak, but just from a still very young. But even then, you can see how like talented this kid is. I spoke to Kevin Dixer. I'm like, yo, just get a younger brother. He's like, no, he has to finish his school first. Then I'm gonna let him play. I'm like, that's a good
bro.
older brother mentality, but just shut the fuck up and
Can
get
we
it
just
right.
like
I want to
revive Indonesian Counter-Strike? Bring back Rekka. You know, fuck Bentet, come back. You know, we got Bentet, we got
Yeah.
Exkurut.
No worries.
Forsaken.
Just,
Yeah,
how much
just
does Bentec
leave.
cost?
Shut up.
Yeah,
much
just
does
leave
Bentec
the
cost?
leave Genji.
No context, no logic allowed on this broadcast, guys. We just want Indonesian Counter-Strike to be great again, and that's what I want to see. So maybe in the year
It's funny,
2025 when we're huge.
Yes, was the best CS:GO team in Asia in 2013. And excelled back in the day.
even like going into like 2015, 2016, Rekka was still one of the best teams. Like playing in Zen League, they won Zen League one of the seasons, and then after that, that's when Bentet left, and basically MVP sort of had their
Tyloo,
run,
yeah,
and obviously Tyloo in China. But look, enough about BTRG. Where I want to see how they go. I'm going to keep my eye on this team. I think it can be good, but they haven't been for the last 6 months, and so hopefully something changes with these new additions. Now, on to the... I love this topic, right? Because I love Boot. I loved Boot as a roster. I've followed them all the way since they were Team Dreamscape, and I really loved watching that roster and how it sort of evolved and eventually kind of went into the bin. And now they've split into 2 teams. So, like, what the fuck's going on here, right? You've got Paper Rex, which is one half of the core. That's the Divide, Bulbasaur, Alex core. And then Huatzai or Huatzi or whatever, which is Splashkey and Benkai with a bunch of other Singaporean players. So who's won out of this, right? Who do you think's actually won out of this? Bleh.
I'm gonna touch upon something which I wanted to bring up a while back when you mentioned like MVP PK and Boot Dreamscape, right? If you look at South Korea and Singapore, they're the 2 main countries, which you would in Asia where there is compulsory military service. And that's something you can't understate. That's been something which killed the South Korean 1.6 scene when all those old school guys like Solo and Glow and Bale, they all had to go for army service for a couple of years. And that killed South Korean 1.6 scene. Then they came back, they played Crossfire or whatever, and then it came back into CSGO again later on. Same thing with Boot as well. They've struggled consistently with the fact that one player or the other is always busy serving his military service. Benkai still has a few months remaining. And if I'm not mistaken, Splashkey is going to be starting his military service this year, like middle of this year or something like that. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to say Paper Rex came out the winners here. All the 5 players, I think, they have the Vi, they have like some potential star players, they have a couple of Indonesian guys, they have the core, they have Alex, who is a very, very, very intelligent Counter-Strike player and overall a very chill guy as well, very experienced player. So looking at it as a unit, I know you don't have Benkai, but hey, if it's not going to be available to practice for like half the year, what's the point in having the guy? I love the guy as a player and whatnot. And Splash is going to be literally in AWOL for like almost a couple of years. Yeah, he might have some breaks here and there, but it's never going to be a consistent player. You can't build a top tier team even in Asia when a couple of your players are going to be away half the time. And I think that's the case with this other team, with the Lays and Splashgate team, where they're there for now, for time being, just to play some tournaments, just to play some qualifiers, but I don't think they're a real team because none of them can really commit to being a professional team.
Really sucks because I think we all know my impressions on Splashkey and Benkai. Obviously, 2 of my favorite players to watch from the Asian region. And I want to see Singaporean CS have like 2 really good teams, and like you could almost argue BTRG has a little bit of Singapore in them as well, so there's like maybe even 3 teams which can hold that banner if they all perform well. But at the moment, I don't see any of these teams actually performing. Do you want to touch on Paper Rex a little bit, Pili? Like these guys, they look like they have an okay roster, but I'm not sure that I see the star power outside of Divide.
Yeah, look, the funny thing is that one of the guys that they've got is actually had Exkurt's brother on his team. So they've decided to not go for him, or he's unavailable. Obviously, that's never going to happen, Blair. If it was going to happen, surely he'd be on this team, mate.
Shut the fuck up.
Look, they've got Subby as well. He's a Malaysian guy who's played with like Archap and Ayman and Ayman, or whatever you want to call him, and stuff like that in the past. You know, been floating around Malaysia, playing in that Frostfire team that Devi was in. So obviously that's been some influence and some input from Devi. He's decided that he's going to be a good fit. He's not, you know, anything amazing. This other guy is not anything amazing. Alex, as we already know, he's a good leader, and he definitely knows how to get a Asian team playing some proper, decent structured CS, which is a very unique skill that's available to very few people. But he can't frag. He can't frag that well. And at the end of the day, the main two people in this roster that you're really looking at are Devi and Bobasaur. Devi is absolutely sick. You know, he can AWP, he can rifle. He's one of the best players in Asia by far. And Bobasaur is wildly inconsistent. So where's the firepower coming from on this team? One of these new guys that they have to get has to turn from a player that's been slumming it out in Asia on like a boom, which is where one of them comes from. Subby's been playing with Ayman and Achap and all those guys in Malaysia. Neither of them have played particularly well. Like, they've played average as on both of these teams. So these guys literally need to become star players, and Alex has got to be able to bring it out of them.
So, like, if Bobasaur's not having a massive day, you know, we know what kind of player Bobasaur can be on his day.
He's literally 30 bomb or 10
That's
bomb.
right. So
that's what Bobasaur
if he's not 30 bombing, you know, you're putting so much pressure on Devi as an individual to step up and carry that game, which I don't know is necessarily the best of ideas. I want to touch on their results in the Asia Minor here. They lose 2-1 to Maple in the LoL bracket, and they lose 2-0 to Lucid Dream in the upper bracket. Now, admittedly, Lucid Dream goes on to win that entire tournament, but for a team of this caliber with individuals like this that used to be on Boot, which was at a time the best team in SEA, that's a massive, massive downgrade, isn't it, Bleh?
Oh, that is a massive downgrade, right? I just want to touch upon Bulbasaur. I feel like I 100% agree. The fact that he either blows really hot or really cold, but the fact that he was in-game leading for Boot for a short period of time, I remember, considering he was the latest addition to the team. And I feel like I think that kind of offsets the fact that he might have very quiet games here and there, but he does, if I'm not mistaken, adds in a lot when it comes to calling and, you know, helping Alex to, like, you know, in-game lead in the server. So it's not just about his fragging ability, but also his mentality or whatever he brings to the team. I
Look,
think
Bleh, you're not telling me anything I want to hear. There's nothing I want less than Bobasaur to start calling and not fragging for this team. There's literally nothing.
So I'm going to bring this up. Like, I saw Pili's reaction straight away there when you were like, he was calling. Pili's just like looking at the roof like, what the fuck is going on?
You're literally coming from someone who was an in-game leader, couldn't frag like through his career. You know, it's not going to get you anywhere. I can tell you from personal experience.
If Bobasaur's calling, what is the point of having Alex on the team?
No, that's the thing. I don't think Boba's calling full-fledged, but he does help add in a lot of
so it's kind of like a Dexter Urquhart sort of a situation.
Kind of very similar. So I'm going to give him that particular benefit, or rather, like, at least that little perk. But I completely agree. Like, Mind Freak and Subby, they're just very mid-range firepower, nothing too special, especially in SEA. Look, the top SEA, you got to beat the top three Thai teams, maybe the top 4 Thai teams, right? And those guys have firepower in abundance. Like, each and every one of those Thai players on those top 3 teams are better individually than Mind Freak or Subby. And that is a major problem, right? And even Alex, I like the guy, super cool guy, like you mentioned as well, a very, very smart head for Counter-Strike, right? But I feel like when the going gets tough, when, you know, the pressure's on, I feel like his calling suffers as well. He becomes too safe, too passive, you know? He just starts playing to not lose rather than playing to win. I've seen this happen time and time again. You know, it's a classic Boot thing. You know, choking at the worst time possible when they're winning it. They start playing very too passively. They lose their balls or something. And I think that's a big issue with Alex as well. And bear in mind, they have DSN coaching for these guys. And they have the support of, I think, CSGO to Asia, the founder, Nick. He's the guy who's founded this org with a bunch of investors and whatnot. So they have everything going for them right now to kind of, if not being called the Kings of Asia, but at least being called the Kings of SEA. But I do agree, firepower-wise is just lacking. And you might have all the tactics in the world, but those Thai guys, I tell you, Pili, I mean, they're just gonna fuck you up, dude.
That's it. I'm a big fan.
I agree with you though, Blair. Like, I think for Paper Rex, they probably aren't going to be the kings of Asia. I don't think that they can do that, but definitely a mark that they should at least be trying to hit is being the best team in SEA and making sure that they can win these kinds of qualifiers and make it to the minors, as opposed to come essentially last place in this qualifier. So that's not good enough for a roster of that caliber. But who knows? Maybe in 6 months we'll see something from them. And I sort of feel like that's a trend or a storyline that we'll be talking about for a lot of these teams, in that there has been that massive roster shuffle, and it's kind of a case of wait and see where they go. But now, Pili, rub your hands together. It's time to start talking about Thai CS. It's your favorite region at the moment, isn't it? And you see these 3 teams in the Asian Minor qualifier, Beyond, Maple, and Lucid, and they're all like, you look at the rosters and you're like, fuck, those teams could be sick, and kind of are sick at the moment, hey?
Yeah, and you've even got a couple of players, outside of that you're like, where are these guys? Remember that Genius guy?
Yep.
Like, where's he at? There's players that I can just name from obscurity
Rolex.
that had some pretty big. What'd you
Mate,
say?
who
Sorry,
can forget Rolex?
Rolex. Oh
What about
yeah,
cigarettes? Like my favorite names.
Where are these guys? Like legit, just literally weaponized.
Those are really good players. Those are really good players, hands down.
Yeah. So, like, I don't think there's a world where in 2020 we see anyone toppling Thai CS, to be honest, within the SCA region, I mean.
Yeah, I don't honestly think it's going to happen, and I don't even think that. Here's the thing, right? You're talking about a team like PaperX already losing to Maple. Like they don't even have that good of a roster in terms of Thailand. Like those are not even 5 players that I'd put together and be like, oh, this is a really sick team, and PaperX can't, take those guys out in an Asia Minor qualifier or something like that. You could even improve that team. They've got a couple of good players who have some pretty decent talent, but Maple, in the grand scheme of things, is one of the more average Thai teams, and they're already dealing with the other nations from SEA.
Kind of insane to me to see Thai CS now when I think about where they were at in 2018, and you would see, was it Signature? I think it was Signature, and like they were the only half decent Thai team, and every time we saw them in a qualifier, I was like, these guys go out in last. And then in 2019, they just start shit stomping everyone. Like, how did that happen, Bleh?
Oh, I have an answer for that. So basically, I think the orgs that came in, right, like Maple, Beyond, and Lucid Dream, these are like actual proper orgs.
What about Signature?
I think Signature always like struggling.
Well, where is Signature now, Pili? Like, if Signature was such a good org, surely they have one of these teams.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, go on, Bleh. Tell us about these orgs.
Yeah, but like these guys, they started like paying them a pretty good salary, like surprisingly very good salary for SCA. Number one. Number two, Thailand has a very, very healthy local scene. Not something many people outside of Asia know about, or even Asian people don't really know about it, but a lot of local online competitions and LANs, a lot of local LANs where, they might not get exposed to outside teams coming in, but hey, they at least get to play against each other regularly on LAN, and it just started, looking good. And number three, because these are proper orgs coming in, contracts started becoming an actual thing. Players couldn't just leave, just because they had a little tiff or a little fight or whatnot. They had to stick around for a while now. And you started seeing, like, last year, the number of roster changes that happened in the Thai teams was minimal. Like, minimal compared to what we've seen the years prior. 2017-18, you had, like, I'm not exaggerating it, but at least like a couple of dozen roster shuffles in a couple of years.
Even get me started on Thai CS
and
roster shuffles.
It's dude, listen, man. Every time I made my notes for the Asian minors, half of it used to be the Thai roster shuffles. And listen, no one gives a fuck. I know no one's going to listen to me when I say this, but I'm just like reading through it. I'm like, this is so wild. This makes no sense. It's like a incestuous Game of Thrones fantasy playing out here in Thailand, right? And it didn't happen last year. And what that led to was the fact that teams started to solidify. They started to become actual teams rather than just like raw fraggers popping off. Like I said, teams like Maple, apart from Just Cause and PP Overdose, which I love. What a name, PP Overdose. And his first name is fucking. Which is fucking amazing. Fucking PP Overdose. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. But anyway, from Just Cause and PP Overdose, you have Niffy. I've heard of him. He used to be kind of like a pug star. And you have Fluke0137 in reality. I haven't heard of these two guys. I'm sorry. And yet they beat BTRG like you mentioned, right? And just because they've been together for a while, despite the fact that you haven't heard these guys, they're still sticking together, not kicking them out to pick up some other random Thai guy. And I think this level of stability in the last 1 year has kind of given Thai CS the standing they have right now in SEA.
Yeah, I'm gonna 100% agree with Blair, and I just want to, even build upon that. That one tournament in January that is one of the main things happening in Asia, WX Invitational. What country was it in? It's Bangkok, Thailand. Toyota
Yep, Thailand.
Masters. All of these not these TOs that we're not, we haven't really heard much from. It's not really an official thing. It's not an ESL tournament, but they're popping up in Thailand time and time again. These one-off competitions and. Whereas if you go to some other tournaments, like you'd expect it to be China if it's going to be Asia at all. We had like Cobex, which was like one Indian tournament, but who knows if that's ever going to happen again. So it's just crazy how these competitions keep happening in Thailand. These FPS Thailand Pro League, these leagues that they don't have to be there, but they always are. And you never see it from the other, SEA regions, the other nations, of them being able to actually just put things together to play for when there isn't anything going on. So that's definitely helped out Thailand, no doubt. It's actually pretty interesting that you have a team like Lucid Dream. They must have just got so good at shuffling around rosters that they know what's happening a lot more, because they've just randomly decided to bring 2 Korean guys in, and it's worked out beautifully.
How long is it going to work out for, Pili, though? Like, is there a world where someone like Beyond, for example, with that roster sort of starts to overtake Lucid Dream? Because I used to sort of see Lucid and Beyond, and it used to be Lucid and Alpha Red as almost interchangeable for number 1 and number 2 within Thailand. So is it just like a case of like, in the now, Lucid's looking better, but 3 or 4 months down the track, who knows, Beyond probably beats them again.
Yeah, I like the Beyond roster. I mean, they took out one of their players and added QQ, who's one of the better players from Lucid Dream, and one of the better players in Thailand. So that you've got Myroles, you've got Olivia, and the other 2 guys just filling the roles. It's it's a pretty good roster in all things considered. I think Beyond, who was Alpha Red, but now they're Beyond, you've had a bit of an org shuffle. They're definitely a roster who stuck together for a while. They showed some promise at that Cobex tournament. They showed some promise in a lot of different competitions, and I expect them to continue developing and continue moving forward. I just think it's a little bit disappointing. Obviously, it doesn't matter as much now, but it's a little bit disappointing that a team like Lucid Dream was able to swap 2 players around and be able to beat them in like a minor competition, a minor qualifier. That's not something that I would have put my money on.
What about you, Bleh?
Yeah, I still feel Beyond has a peak that they can potentially reach, right? Because again, I know this has been overstated time and time again, but I'm a firm believer that communication comms is perhaps the most important aspect in Counter-Strike, right? And let's be honest, the Thai guys, most of them cannot speak English very well, and that means that getting the 2 Korean players means there is going to be that cap, right? At one point, when it comes to them being really tested on LAN, when emotions running high, whatnot, the comms might break down, can break down, will happen. I've seen it happen to other teams as well. So keeping there in mind, I still see kind of like a soft cap to how far Lucid can really go. But Beyond, I still feel they're untapped. I still feel they have a long way to go. QQ, Olivia, Meryl's, KNTZ, SDK. I wish I could call them cunts. Such a cool name. KNTZ.
I did say that.
Anyway.
I've said that on a few Pro League broadcasts.
He did tweet out at me, tweet at me saying that it's actually KNTZ, so I can't say it anymore. But yeah. Anyway, if you look at these names, I've seen these guys for years now in different lineups, and the fact that they've been together for a while here, they're looking so damn good. And yes, they lost to Lucid, but that's also the nature of domestic competition, right? We've seen that even in other regions as well. If you look at the Swedish derbies, for example, Fnatic and Nib, the French derbies, those can get messy. And these Thai guys, they know each other so well that even though Lucid came out on top, I don't necessarily think Lucid's the better team than Beyond for that matter. But I think Beyond would fare better compared to Lucid Dream against some of the other teams out there. Like, for example, if Beyond went to the Asian minor, if they qualified, I personally feel they would have done a better job than Lucid Dream. I have an inkling, although we'll never find out now. But still,
that's certainly an interesting topic to discuss.
I really think they will go farther, and I'm keeping an eye on these guys more than Lucid.
All right. Well, one thing I will say for Lucid is I sure as fuck hope that PTC has learned something from his time in 5 Power, speaking 5 different languages in one team, because they're back at it again. And hopefully Lucid Dream
What a
can make it
baller.
work. But I have faith that at least Lucid will be one of the best teams in SEA still. And I think there's one more team that we really should touch on here, and that's Bren from the Philippines. And it's been a long time between drinks for Philippines Counter-Strike. In fact, this might actually be the best team that they've ever had. I don't know if they're like a team that's a huge contender within Asia as a whole, but I'm really excited to see a team from the Philippines actually having a degree of success. And Billy, I know you're a big fan of this Bren roster and Puppy Chulo. So why don't you start us off here and tell us what do you think of Bren at the moment?
One of my only good casts, in my opinion, is a game that no one will ever watch at Extremes Lad, where Bren upset Boot Dreamscape, and it is the first time that I was screaming puppy at the top of my lungs. Hopefully not the last time,
I remember this.
depending on how the rest of my relationships go throughout my lifetime, and whether I choose to change my sexual preference. But that's kind of neither here nor there. In terms of Philippine CS, I mean, it's basically the perfect example of a no scene becoming somewhat relevant. No one expected anything to come out of the Philippines. Nobody asked for anything to come out of the Philippines. They had a couple of guys who would go insane and drop 30, 40 bombs online. On HLTV, sometimes I'd just be scrolling down the results a couple of years ago, and I'd see some bloke from the Philippines dropping 40 bomb on a relevant team, and that's all I really thought about. But Bren is a team who actually tries to play a proper approach to CS, actually tries to play structured, and that's really impressive to see, and it's given them some decent results. I mean, they have definitely become one of the more impressive teams in SEA, and I think at the current point they're at, outside of the Thailand guys, outside of what we're seeing from Huatzai or Paper Rex, they are the ultimate gatekeepers. They're the teams that are consistently shutting down these teams below them. But I feel like from what we saw from Extremes Lad last year and moving forward, if a team like Bren isn't better than a Huatzai, that team with Splashkey and Benkai in it, if they aren't better than like a Paper Rex or something like that, then I feel like it's a little bit of a departure from the upward trend that we saw at the end of 2019.
You're a fan of Bren as well, Bleh?
I am. I think Pili pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I like the way they play Counter-Strike. I like the way they approach the game. It's not about having a couple of star players just popping off, and they are really the gatekeepers. If you want to make a mark in SEA, you need to beat these guys. But that being said, they had an upward trajectory last year, and it was surprising for me. And I've seen these guys here and there, but they haven't done anything much. But then suddenly they're like beating everyone, looking good at while beating them as well. But they seem to have tapered off a little bit. Again, there is the factor that we haven't really seen that many tournaments out there right now. But looking at the trajectory they had, I thought they'd probably be potentially the best team in SEA. But they are still struggling to beat the Thai teams, and even against some of the other East Asian teams. Whenever I've seen them play in some qualifiers and whatnot, they haven't really looked the best, right? So they are definitely a step above the Paper Rexes and the X-Boot guys and some of the other SCA teams out there right now, or even some of the East Asia teams for that matter. And I'd even rate them above some of the half of the Chinese teams in the top 10 in China for that, But I think they've kind of plateaued out. And like Pili said, they are the gatekeepers, but nothing beyond that. And unless something changes, I don't know. That's a sad thing. I don't know what changed. The team works, the unit works, but it could be lack of firepower. But even if you ask me who to cut and who to add, I don't know. I don't know that many Filipino players out there who can really replace them. These guys are the pick of the lot, right? So who are you going to add? Who are you going to cut? Who are you going to bring in? I don't know. So I kind of feel like this is. I know it's kind of like me sounding like a negative Nancy, but I think this is as far as they're going to go. They're going to be a good team. They're going to be a good gatekeeper team. But beyond that, I don't see them, for example, qualifying for a minor or maybe winning a minor. I don't see that ever happening.
I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world. Maybe some of the individuals on this roster do go on to bigger and better things, and we sort of trace it all the way back to where they started here.
Maybe.
But I'm pretty happy with how Brendan's performing at the moment, and I think it's really cool just to see a team from the Philippines. Did you have something to say there, Pili?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking through their results, and it's something that you don't really see from a lot of these Southeast Asian teams as of late. Even some of the Thai teams, is that Bren in January, they took a map off of Vici. They even upset Tyloo in the Katowice qualifiers before you saw Zeta come into the lineup. You go to more recent stuff. At the end of January, they played that WX Invitational in Thailand. They lost to Maple. They lost to Huatsai. They didn't play very well. But even in the Asian Minor, the Rio Quals, which is the most recent result at the start of last month, they took a map off Beyond. That's a team that we all considered to be pretty decent, but they lost again to Huatsai. So it's interesting. It seems like this is the kind of team that they can play a good map of CS, like good enough to play at the top level of Asia, like beat a Tyloo or beat a Vici on a certain map if they get the right matchup, if they get the right approach, even beat some of the Thai teams. But the consistency isn't there, and I feel like they're losing to teams that they should be better on than on paper, which doesn't bode well for the future.
All right. Well, that was about 35 minutes of us talking about SEA Counter-Strike. We do still have one more region to touch on, although I think it will be a little bit more brief than that last one. The Middle East. Now, I haven't paid that much attention, actually, to Middle Eastern Counter-Strike recently, since, actually, to be honest, probably 2017, early 2018. So I'm not exactly that knowledgeable on this. The team that actually qualified through to the minor was Camel Riders, who I've never heard of before. I looked at some of the players on that roster, and honestly, I didn't really recognize any of them. I think Misty and Joker sort of ring a bell a little bit, but it seems like there's just been this massive shakeup in Middle Eastern Counter-Strike play.
I'm going to take a look here. Misty, yeah, I heard Misty, but all right, here's the thing. Here's the thing. No one, and I mean no one, not even the Middle Eastern guys know who's the best team in Middle East right now, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. And if they say it, there's a huge bias, and this is me putting it out there. Is there are no lands that happen. I haven't seen any pan Middle Eastern land that's taken place in the recent past, or for that matter in the past few years, right? Or ever for that matter. Now here's the thing. You have the GCC, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. That is the UAE, that's where Nasser is from. Nasser, aka they're also known as Risky Gaming and all those guys, yeah. Then you have Saudi Arabia, you have Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. I think that's 6 or 7 countries right there, right? That's the GCC. They ping very good to Dubai. The Dubai servers, they get like great ping, wonderful, fucking amazing for them. Now, you have the rest of the Middle East, the MENA region, which is like North Africa. You have like Egypt, and then you have like Lebanon, and you have Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and all these other countries. They ping much better to Europe, to EU, maybe to France, I think. France and Germany, maybe mainly towards France. So they get like 60, 70 ping. I'm including Israel as well in that. So they ping good to Europe. They get 300 ping to Dubai, although the geographical closer, because the networking, the routing in that region is fucked beyond belief. As in, you can't even use VPNs. It's physically impossible for them to ping well to the Dubai servers. And obviously, the teams from the GCC, your Nasser and all these guys, they're going to ping like 400 or 300 to the EU servers. So there is literally no middle ground where these guys, apart from a LAN, where they can actually show which team is better. So in the GCC, hands down, the guys from Nasser and these guys are the best. And then you have some of these mixed teams like Camel Riders for that matter. And then you have the teams from, a couple of teams from Israel. I do believe one of them actually qualified for I do believe it was the Faceit Minor, if I'm not mistaken, Israeli team. Or was it the Starlighter one? I forget. Anyway, you have Israeli teams, and you have some of the Lebanese teams. Like, for example, we had, what's his name? Isa's team play one of the minors a couple of years back as well, right? So you can see it's a pretty broad region, but unfortunately, unlike the rest of Asia, the routing is impossible. So you see all these Middle Eastern qualifiers which clump all these countries together. Oh, don't forget, they also threw in South Africa this time around, right? So that didn't go nicely for the minors.
What?
So the Middle Eastern region is the most fucked up region to have an online qualifier. The only fair way, and this is my opinion, is to have the GCC qualifier separately. Don't call it Middle East, call it a GCC qualifier, where those 7 countries play for one slot, and then the rest of the Middle East, clump them with EU, or let them play a separate qualifier. Now, that means you're going to have 2 teams coming up from the Middle Eastern region. I know that's not ideal, because obviously for the Middle East, you can't have 2 teams coming in, because the region hasn't really proven anything, right? You only want to have 1 team. The only region in Asia where I'd have 2 teams from is China or Australia. But that is literally the only option they have. And maybe have these 2 teams fly down, play a 1v1, this team versus other team in a best of 3, and then pick that one team from that and make them go to the minors or whatever. But there is no one ideal solution. Meaning, that even right now we don't know which is the best Middle Eastern team. So Camel Riders looks like they're the
Let's
best
go.
team.
So basically, it seems like
That's what Camel Riders.
Middle East is kind of going to be gatekept unless something changes with the minor system, Pili.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
mean,
thing. How do you fix it?
Oh, I've got a great solution, and it relies on one of the ultimate stereotypes. Look, all I'm saying is there's a bunch of young Arabic guys that are playing some CS. Actually, a lot of them, they're getting on a bit from where they used to be. Some of those risky guys are the more relevant Middle Eastern players in my mind, just because they're the ones I'm used to watching. But come on, surely somebody's got a dad who's got a little bit of extra pocket change. Maybe can host a little event. Fly a few people over, and we can settle, who actually
He
is
can
the Middle
hire us
Eastern
as
event properly. That would be good to see. I think it needs to be a land competition at the end of the day. The routing is just too ridiculous to be able to actually make something happen, or you have to split the regions, exactly what Blair said, because, I mean, look, we've had the whole discussion, but we didn't actually say what ended up happening with that qualifier, which is that we ended up having a best of 3 grand final where each team had to take a turn playing on 200 to 300 ping. And one of them ended up forfeiting as a result of that. And that's how we ended up with the team at an Asian minor. Like, who's going to take that seriously?
This is what happened for people tuning in who had no idea. Map 1 was played on EU server where one team had 60, the other had 300. Second map was played on the Dubai server where one team had 300, other had 5. The third map, the first half was played in EU, the second half was played on the Dubai server. How is that fair? It's not fair for anyone, but there is not a solution.
Yeah, and they were all one-sided maps.
Funnily enough.
And here's the problem, even Pili's solution, right? If that happens, let's say you have a rest of the Middle East qualifier and then a GCC qualifier. You have 2 teams. Now, a LAN for 2 teams, that's easy, right? You just hire like a local cyber cafe or gaming cafe and just like fly them down, let them play. The moment you do that, the rest of the world are going to be like, hey, why don't we have LAN qualifiers for the minors? How is that fair? So,
well, TOs just tell it how it is all the time. So you just tell them.
But
Do
Reddit's
you have
gonna
fucked up routing?
Reddit's gonna cry about it,
Oh, we have a problem that literally can't be fixed due to endemic problems with the routing. So we're trying to find a creative solution through things that are within our control. If people want to have a whinge about that, go for it, mate.
I do have a solution, but it's not going to be fair, a little bit fair. But I think this is the most realistic one, and this is one which we did when I was part handling the DreamHack Masters. I think it was a Marseille, the qualifiers, where we had the GCC region as the Middle East, and the winner from that played the rest of Asia, the Asian qualifier, right? And the rest of the Middle East, they got clumped with EU. Now, it's fair because they had the ping, but then they're going to be facing off against the most stacked region in Counter-Strike Global Offensive in the world. So, yeah.
I mean,
I think that's the most reasonable solution, but
maybe that makes them better players. End of the day, you only get better when you play people that are better than you.
That's how Issa and Woxa got found out. So, boom, right there. There we go. We sorted it out.
We have fixed the Middle Eastern minor qualifiers. Congratulations, guys.
Yeah, let's not say we fixed the Middle East problem because we don't want to get.
I think that's a really historic moment for us to end our first episode on.
We fixed the Middle East qualifier problem. There we go.
God, that was so easy, man. Imagine what we can do in 100 episodes. Oh God, Counter-Strike's going to be the best thing ever.
World peace, solve the corona problem, like hunger, war, plague, all of that jazz. Yeah, dude.
Fantastic work, gentlemen. So yeah, that is going to be the end of episode 1 of Geographically Challenged. Now, a lot still to discuss, as you can see. We've got an hour and 43, and I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface. We've still got minors to talk about, what would have happened at the Asia minor, what's going to happen with this RMR system. That's all coming up in the next episode. Before we close things off, though, I do want to give you guys the chance to shout anything out that you want to. So, Pili, let's start with you. You got any shout outs or any final thoughts?
Not really. Shout out to Thailand for literally coming out of nowhere and being number 1. I just can't wait to see it continue. Long live Thai CS. A little disappointed that they didn't overtake China. Like, I thought that was actually going to happen. Apart from that, I'm actually keen to see how some of these DreamHack tournaments that have been announced are going to be looking. And I'm looking forward to some of the opportunities that may crop up due to the lack of competitive opportunities for some of these Asian teams, and I hope I'm able to be involved in some capacity.
Yeah, something we can definitely talk about on the next episode. You can find Pili at Pili CSGO on Twitter. His handle is right underneath his webcam, so if you haven't figured that out by now, I don't know what to tell you. Let's go to Bleh. Any final thoughts? Any shout-outs for you, Bleh?
Yeah, I agree with Pili, Thai CS. I really hope they do start to really come together properly and start to take the lead. I want to see Tyloo start to figure out what they want to do. I'm seeing good signs, but obviously I want them to be a team that can compete with the best out there. They've been given a great opportunity to play in EU right now, right? So I want them to obviously do well. Nothing much else. I mean, CS wise, Asian CS, it's kind of like that, that rough relationship you have where you just can't let go. That's always been for me for a long time. And keeping things a little bit more topical, yeah, stay at home, motherfuckers. So stay at home. Don't step out. Don't be a dumb fuck, Stay at home.
Yeah.
Kill Corona that way,
I don't know how easy it's going to be for someone like you to let go of Asia CS. You always continually tell me that you're going to, but you never do. You're always getting sucked back in.
I believe this is what addiction is. I've managed to survive quite a long time on this planet not being addicted to anything or having any terrible haunting relationships, but Asian Counter-Strike, man.
Yep, definitely one of those
it's a wild
one of those drugs that hopefully more people get on, because I want to talk about Asian Counter-Strike with a lot more people. Obviously that was Bleh. You can find him on official Bleh, again, Twitter down below his webcam. I have been Elfishguy, and that was Geographically Challenged episode 1. Thank you so much for watching. Would love it if you would drop a subscribe on the YouTube channel or give us a like, do whatever. Let us know what you think and let us know what you want to hear more of, because we are definitely keen to talk more Asian Counter-Strike and more Counter-Strike in general, I'm sure. But that's the end of episode 1, so we'll see you next time.